All right, thank you everybody, and welcome very much to Spoonful of Content Sugar. My name is Douglas Lee Miller, and I'm very excited and very happy to be here on this Monday, talking for the WordPress campus folks. Just a little bit of an introduction of myself. My name is Doug Miller again, and I worked in higher education for over 15 years, really. And I had the opportunity to work for a number of different organizations at various different sizes. I worked for a big state school, Indiana University in Bloomington. I worked for a small private liberal arts Christian college in Elgin, Illinois called Judson University, used to be called Judson College. And I worked for DePaul University in the Department of Career and Money Management, which is inside of enrollment management. And I served also at Judson and DePaul as adjunct faculty when I was there as well. Every time that I had an opportunity to work at a new school, I made sure to focus on technology and media and marketing. And that's why I was really excited to talk about this topic for you guys today. It's been a subject very close to my heart for most of my life. And hopefully we'll have a chance to move things in a direction that's a little bit more content related, although we will be discussing some technology related subjects as well. So looking forward to that. All right. So I wanted to kick it off today by actually asking you all to be thinking reflectively about when you think about these issues, why you chose WordPress to begin with, because odds are you picked it for a reason. And when you're thinking about participation and subject matter experts and getting folks involved in the process of content generation, there were probably those questions bubbling around when you were looking at WordPress to begin with. So as we move forward into some of these topics, I want you to sort of reach back into those questions from your foundational decisions you made about why WordPress or any other CMS or content system to begin with, because you picked it for a reason. And hopefully those become a little bit clearer as we move through. As far as I'm concerned, the number one reason to pick any kind of web platform, whether it's a content management system or a blogging platform or being involved in a social platform, has to do with attention, right? And the fact that we have this content then allows us to do what we do with content, which is to gather people's attention. That is the most important thing that we would like for our content to do, because if our content is out there and no one sees it, it's not reaching the goals that it was set and defined from the beginning. There is a question that you have to ask yourself when you're heading out into solving these problems of content participation and attention gathering. And one of those questions that's essential is, once you have that attention, what are you going to do with it? Right? What are you doing with that attention once you get it? So along with having you, sort of be thinking about why you chose WordPress to begin with, I want you to be thinking also foundationally about what you intend to do with that attention once you have it, once you've gotten the participation from the subject matter experts, right? So as we know, different pieces of content are relevant to different audiences. I have a phrase that I like to repeat over and over and over again when it comes to content, which is that sort of builds off of a very famous inauguration speech, and I think you'll recognize it. And the phrase that I like to build on is, ask not what your content can do for you, but what you, through your content, can do for your communities, the communities that your content is designed to serve. So the reason to get subject matter experts involved is because we know that different pieces of content attract and appeal to different audiences and types of people. And how do we fill the houses that we build online with the right content, right? Because depending on where you are and what part of the university you work for, maybe you work in a department Maybe you work in marketing or management. Maybe you work in IT. There could be a ton of different places that you work. Maybe you work in a big department. Maybe you work in a small department. Maybe you're the only one who can do what you need to do. When it comes to content, you can build the house, but filling it with the right things on the inside often requires that participation with the subject matter expert. But as we know, right, they are the key to content success. Those subject matter experts might be difficult to get the participation of, which is why you're here to try and figure out, because challenges with the subject matter experts remain. And we all know what those challenges are. We know how difficult it is or is not to get that participation, and we know sort of what the barriers are. So be thinking right now about what those barriers are for your own specific context, what they are from your own specific, unique point of view about what those barriers look like. My son has this thing where I ask him a question and I'll ask him, so why? And he'll say, because raisins. And what he really means is because reasons. And so that's why I have this picture of raisins here, because that's a call out to my son. But in terms of those challenges, the reasons that we encounter most often, or that I've encountered historically in the work that I've done, working with individuals, either as a consultant here now at WSOL or when I worked in higher education, is, you'd hear things like, I don't want another account to manage. I don't want another password to remember. I don't want to be taxed with another portal to log into, because there are already so many. Some of the other things you might hear, the subjects that I am an expert about are too complex to be put into a blog post, right? Or maybe you might hear someone say, there's no way, I'm not good with words, or I'm not good with images or making things look right. I just don't know how to take what I am smart about and to put it into that context. Or you just might have someone that says, I just flat out don't want the attention, right? I don't want my name to be associated with that, or I don't want that extra layer of attention on me. Or just the most common one, which is, I've got so many other irons in the fire right now, there's no way I have time to participate in this content, right? That challenge is as true for WordPress as it is for any other system that you might be using to get content out in front of the right people. So that's why we're looking at trying to reduce the friction, those reasons for not participating. That's what it is difficult to get people to do. But what we want to do is we want to take that normal friction of those excuses and start to reduce them one by one as often as possible in as many ways as possible, right? If folks have any specific questions, I am looking at the Q&A, so I'll try and keep an eyeball on that as well. And you can pop in if you want to stop me, and I'll be putting some resources links together at the end of this as well. But essentially, when it comes to solving those problems, what I'd like to do is I'd like to split that into two different approaches, what I call the two-pronged approach to sweetening the process. So that's the spoonful of sugar there. So the first prong of this two-prong approach is something that most folks probably in this community, in this WordPress campus community, are going to be pretty familiar with, because inherently what they deal with on a day-to-day basis has to do with using technology to solve problems, right? And so most folks have looked at that problem of subject matter engagement, subject matter participation, and said, all right, well, this is the tool that we're going to use to solve that problem. That's the great news, is that WordPress is a technology that is designed to reduce subject matter expert participation friction. That's part of how it's built. That's part of why it's built in terms of multiple authors and community management, right? So the other side of that is that, and the thing that I've encountered with a lot of different folks that I've worked with in these contexts and had conversations with about these tools and what they can and can't do and what they open up in terms of challenges and opportunities, is that, yes, you may technically, from a technical point of view, be able to have multiple authors and contributors and manage many accounts. But oftentimes it's a bit like herding cats just to get anything accomplished, especially if you're a small office, or you have maybe one editor that's in charge of making sure the content goes out there. Maybe you've got a team of folks who are charged with making sure that the machinery, that the house is built and it's functioning properly and it's hosted properly and the websites load when they're supposed to. And then you might have somebody that's in charge of making sure that the content gets published on a regular schedule, or determining what those schedules are, figuring out what's going to be talked about at what time and why and by who. And sometimes that can really be, like I said, a cumbersome process and feel a lot like you're herding cats. That's been my experience. Just because there's someone who's inside of a system, from a technical point of view, you've solved this problem, you've given them, you said, okay, all you got to do is you got to go and you got to log into your WordPress account and you got to make a post, and then boom, you can blog. Just because they can do that doesn't necessarily mean they will. And that's part of what we're trying to address today, is how to move them along the spectrum from able to participate to actually participating. So to do that, we're going to give them a little bit of incentive. We're going to have some, like a spoonful of, like I call a spoonful of content sugar to help the medicine go down. So maybe you're familiar with this, maybe you're not, maybe you use it already, maybe you don't. It's hard to judge based off of this community, where you all, because there's a huge spectrum of comfort levels with technology, and I've seen some really awesome examples today of implementation, and I've seen some really great questions from folks who are just getting started. So I think this, from a technological point of view, the suggestion that maybe you might be able to have another way for your subject matter experts to participate that doesn't necessarily involve them directly logging in and posting through the interface the way that you would traditionally expect that somebody might do that. And it's one method that you can use in order to reduce that friction for the subject matter participation. One of the ways we did that, specifically when I worked at DePaul University, was to get the folks who were the subject matter experts to participate by email. Now, at the time, we used a different service. When I worked for DePaul University, I navigated them from a WordPress.org implementation over into another implementation of a different CMS called Nation Builder, which is a hybrid CMS CRM, and then into another, finally where they are right now, which is WordPress.com implementation for hiredeball.org, which is the Career Center's blog. But when we initially started having folks participate, the blog was powered by something called Posterous, which doesn't exist anymore. But they had an excellent feature that even WordPress.com has, which allows you to have subject matter experts and authors and contributors use an email account to submit new content, to get content into your content feed and chain by having people use their email client to create content, where they're actually editing, they're writing, they're composing in their email client like they would, and then they're hitting send, and when they hit send, that content goes into the WordPress blog. Because at WordPress.com, there is a custom email address that can be attributed to each individual author contributor, right? Each one gets their own unique address to email address to send to, okay? And because what I found is that experts are more likely to participate if no password was involved, because that was one of the primary friction points of being involved as a subject matter in the content generation process, right? So one email address per contributor or author and a WordPress.com deployment, custom email address, they compose, have attachments, it gets sent into the queue for publishing, having editor look at it. On a WordPress.org side, you're going to need to use something like a plugin for like Posty or Jetpack, and I'll post some links to those plugins if you're not familiar with those as well. But the same functionality is there, right? It used to be inherent in the WordPress environment, but there were some changes from a security point of view, and so it needs to happen via plugins at this particular juncture on those deployments. So you can use those plugins to help folks participate in the content chain that way. Another way that you can do that is you can just take the existing structure with XML and RPC and take those XMLRPC methods and extend them. and allow for remote posting through a variety of different web blogging pieces of software and even custom ones as well. And if you're working with partners or if you're working with platforms, there are lots of interesting things that you can do. And I'm going to give you some examples from a technological point of view of things that might assist and facilitate that process when you're working with a platform, but you can, like I said, you can always work with a partner as well to work those APIs. So let's take the Zapier integrations, for example, and talk about those a little bit. And Zapier.com, if you're not familiar with it, is a way to integrate API level activities based off of triggers and responses. And those triggers and responses, the recipes that you put together is what they call them in if this then that, IFTTT.com, or Zapier.com calls them Zaps instead of recipes. One of them is to set up a draft post in WordPress, right? And then have that draft post in WordPress be originated through new Google Doc creation. So let's say, for example, your subject matter experts are really super used to working in Google Docs. Like that's how they work. They create their content in Google Docs. They share it with one another for peer review in Google Docs. And to be able to have a new Google Doc trigger a draft post in WordPress is a really easy way to reduce that friction for your subject matter experts and make sure that they can get into the environment as they're looking for it, right? And then let's take a look at another one here. If you have folks, for example, who work in Evernote, maybe you've got faculty members or staff, and their go-to place for keeping track of the work that they do is Evernote. This is a really great way to take each Evernote post and say, all right, well, let's take each new Evernote post and create it as a WordPress draft so that folks are adding to that content train. They're participating in it without friction. So there's an important point that I want to make here, which is going to, I think, segue us nicely into the second half of the two-pronged approach, is that once you start talking about these integrations and working the APIs and thinking about things a little bit more broadly in terms of where content can come from in a non-traditional context where they're not physically logging into the portal as you might expect, you start to open the door to a different kind of discussion about content contribution, right? And you start to open your mind a little bit about what content is, where it comes from, right? So one of the things that I had the chance to open up a discussion about in the blog post that I wrote as a preview to this, which is at blog.wsol.com, is that maybe, we are all too often quick to sort of run out and solve problems with technology that don't necessarily need to be solved with technology, which is part of the reason why I took a two-pronged approach for this solution, is that on the one hand, yes, there are some technological tricks that you can put in place that can lower the barrier of entry, that can reduce the friction, but sometimes you can eliminate the problem altogether just by taking a different point of view about how you're going to solve the problem, whether or not you're going to use technology to solve the problem. Because problems with technology participation are not always best solved by technology. If, as I say in the blog post where I discuss some of this and try to raise a little bit of conversation about it, if the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, as they say, every problem starts to look like a nail, right? And that may not be the best application for that specific scenario that you're looking at solving, right? And that leads us, I think, to the second prong of this approach, which is to be able to say, let's look at the problem of subject matter participation from a content point of view. Because I think that inherently, when you start talking to subject matter experts about participating in content processes, there are a set of expectations that they have in their mind about what's going to be required, about what it's going to look like, about what it's going to be like. And to open up that content opportunity, that content Pandora's box, and say, let's look at things differently and find out what we can do to make it easier for someone to participate based on our understanding of what content looks like. What literally, what if I told you that content is everywhere? I mean, I don't really think that I need to tell you that, because I think people understand inherently. They know when they look around them that we are taxed. We are overrun with content. It is literally everywhere, and it can be literally anything can be content on the internet now. And I think that's part of another problem that we have in terms of attention and attention management and getting attention and keeping it, and then deciding what we're going to do with that attention once we have it. What's the call to action that we have that's a part of that content? That's a question I think that doesn't get addressed often enough. And another essential part of solving the problem is using something else besides technology. But I would encourage you to think beyond the login and post in order to reduce that friction barrier, and to think about things in a different manner about where content comes from. Offer to do a phone interview. We have a lot of clients that we work with right now where we're encouraging them to take their approaches to subject matter expertise offline, and to have content specialists who are well-versed in marketing practices, like understanding what keywords are going to be the best, the most effective from an SEO point of view, from a content and attention generating point of view, and to have those folks call the subject matter experts and basically be reporters for them and get information from them, and turn that subject matter expertise into a bulleted list that they can then either write on their behalf or list them out in the post as a contributor, as a co-contributor, just like you would see someone interviewed in a newspaper article. This brings us to the point of ghostwriting, which I think that's another opportunity where you can have those folks who are more well-versed in the marketing aspects and in the aspects of content creation, talk to those people who have those issues of content participation that are, I don't know how to take what I do and boil it down into bite-sized chunks, right? It's very difficult for me to do that. This is where you have the opportunity to say, look, that's not a problem. You know, what we can do is we can write on your behalf. We'll submit it to you for approval before it goes live so that you can take a look at it and preview it. But we will essentially take the interview that we have with you and put it into bite-sized chunks, share it back with you to make sure that we're saying things that you would say in the way that you would say it, and then get it out there and as a part of the content chain. Essentially, you want to, whatever opportunity you have, is to lower the barriers of entry to that participation process, to reduce the friction, because those are the complaints that you're going to have in terms of participation. So thinking a little bit beyond the text blog and the point of view of just logging in and making a post, what else can happen there? What other opportunities might you have? Well, in some contexts, we've recommended that folks reach out to their subject matter experts and say, hey, let me get you in a Skype interview. Let me get you in a Google Hangout. Let me get you in a Crowdcast, and let's record that. All right, let's record that conversation. And then you have the opportunity to lead that person through the content process, ask questions, get them answered, put them into bite-sized chunks. Knowing what we know about the way that video, the way that people respond to video online these days, I think that anybody has to look at this as a viable option in terms of how attention is managed. But you can also think about other aspects, right? Maybe there's event-specific content that starts to happen. If there's a conference that they're presenting at, right? Or if there is a campus-wide event that's going on, an open house, or an opportunity for folks to interact with faculty, that you have an opportunity right there to get folks who normally would not be involved from a subject matter expert point of view into the content process. Images showing different steps of what they work on and how they work on it, right? So first I did this, then I did this, then I did this, then I did this. An opportunity for them to break down their study or their creations or their expertise into bite-sized chunks visually, because as you know, visual information is, again, along with video, how we manage the attention of the folks that we're trying to communicate with online. Already existing documents, this has been historically a very huge thing. For me, and my experience is that people have their hard drives full of content that they think is not good content for either blog posts or subject matter expertise. And it's trapped inside their hard drives. You want to be able to get that content out of their hard drives and onto the web in ways that's useful and functional for the right audiences, right? So documents that are already existing, or previous presentations that they present at conference, right? Because that's a PowerPoint presentation is another kind of content that can go easily within a blog context with some situational placement. So think about those things. Think about stuff that's already going on. Think about things that people are already doing that are generating content, and put them into the content strategy in ways that make it approachable for the subject matter expert. A couple of resources just to recommend in terms of for video interviewing, right? If you're going to be video interviewing and you're going to be placing those videos into a specific, WordPress context, think about deploying them using something like Wistia or Vidyard, which are hosting platforms for video that allow for native CTAs or calls to action within the video content itself. So let's say, for example, you're having a piece of video that is an interview with a subject matter expert that's about ready to speak at an open house, and you want someone to register for that open house. You just slap that video in there and make sure that there is a call to action at the very end of the video that says register for that open house, or register for this event that's coming up, or go look at this piece of content that's related. And then you can chart that on the back end. Another tool for video interviews using ScreenFlow for recording anything on your screen, if you have a Macintosh, is a very powerful video editing tool that very user-friendly, something that you can jump right into, and that gives you a high-quality product. Skype, Hangouts, even Slack does conversations now in video, so you can record those video chat sessions and then take those recorded video chat sessions and turn them into video content that can then live on your blog. Even a Facebook Live post, right? You can go live with your Facebook page and you can interview a subject matter expert using your smart device, right? And have that subject matter expert participate in the content process that way. And then, of course, we know what Cloudcast is like because we're all using it. So just to go back a little bit and to talk about some more Zaps that are possible to use to help you open your minds about what's possible for content from an API point of view, think about using this Zap, which allows for the trigger of a WordPress post every time that a new Meetup event is created. So let's say you're using Meetup in order to have your student organization create an event listing, right? So every time there's a new event listing in Meetup, then that creates and triggers a new WordPress post. So think about events as possible opportunities for subject matter expertise content. Instagram posts, if they're in Instagram and they're using it, you can create a new WordPress post off of an Instagram photo. There's a Zap for that as well. And again, there are corresponding recipes over if this, then that. So those are two very good services, and there are additional services that Microsoft has as well. So another thing I want you to think about, maybe you have maybe you have a department, an internal academic department, and that internal academic department sends out an email newsletter to folks, once a month with what's going on in the department, and more than likely it probably goes out just through Outlook or some other sort of service like that, but maybe you might put together a MailChimp or something like that. Having that MailChimp campaign automatically trigger a new WordPress post is another opportunity for places to source that content. And also, I would highly recommend making sure that you are charting what's happening with those emails that you're sending out. So I know that it tends to happen a lot to just use campus-provided email services, but I'd highly recommend looking at a marketing automation platform for something like that. I see someone here saying that their school pays for a lecture capture program that's also embeddable. If there's any kind of paid video tool, you also want to know that the payments are structured. In our case, it's by views, so that's something to be wary of also. So you might want to move to YouTube if a post was particularly possible in order to manage those pay per view or paid per traffic items. I've heard other people in this session talk about RSS and the role that it plays in WordPress and the excitement that there is for the future regarding the ways that those kinds of things can be automated. And the reality is that with this really simple syndication tool, feed items, then there opens up a whole host of opportunities, whether it's through the API as you're working with a partner, or if there's something that you have in-house where folks can develop things. There's just limitless opportunity really there as far as the APIs are concerned through RSS. Once you open your mind to the places that content can come from, it gives you more powerful tools to reducing those friction elements for subject matter expert participation, right? Fewer opportunities for them to say, I'm too busy, or this is too hard, or I'm not suited to be able to do this. A couple of participation tips that I want to leave you with. These are also found on the blog. Some of my coworkers and I have talked about these at length with the folks that we work with. When it comes to making sure that folks feel comfortable participating in that content process, it works really well if, whether you're working on the technology side or you're working on the content side from a marketing and management point of view, to know the calendar of those subject matter experts, to know what they're going through when, so that you can say, look, I know that you're going to conference during this time, or I know that you've got a super big teaching load during this time, so we can plan your content around those elements, or we can work ahead. We can do the interviews and get those written and get those ready for you to approve before you get busy, and then just have them waiting in the queue along the way. No matter what, it's important, I think, to communicate those expectations early and often to make sure that folks know what the expectations are, and that you encourage, whenever they participate, as much as you can, conversational language. When you have the opportunity to suggest topics that are based on data, right, but that let them fill in the details, because that's what is at the essence of the mantra that I mentioned at the top, which is to think always of not what can my content do for me, but what can my content do for my community? What can my content do for the community that I'm trying to serve through that content? And there's no better way to unlock that than through subject matter expertise, and getting those folks involved and reducing the barriers to their participation. So open that door to content contribution, all right? There's a discussion on my blog about the differences between technological solutions versus content solutions. I hope that you feel open to participate in that. I'm also available at Video In, which is my Twitter handle, and I'll be tweeting out a couple of support links along with some of the Zaps and if this then that recipes that I mentioned, along with some other items, including some content audit templates that you might find useful. And so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at that time. And I see that there's one question in here, which is, how does using Skype/phone calls add to time if you have to go through to transcribe the conversation? Do you use recordings directly or edit the content, or would emails be easier? Well, I think you've given 3 very specific and great scenarios for those, and I think each one is dependent upon the nature of the interaction that you have with the specific subject matter expert and what works best for them. And then also understanding, because only you know what your editorial bandwidth is on the inside, how big your team is to be able to take those calls and transcribe them into a conversation, whether or not it's worth it from a resource point of view. And I think that understanding that can also inform what you do as far as the recordings are concerned for a video, from a video point of view. By my assessment, it is very easy these days to have low or no touch post-production video elements. So I'll say that again, a low or no touch post-production video elements. And that allows you to be able to say, well, this is kind of a low or no touch video, low or no touch post-production video element that we're in the midst of right here. So this is being recorded as we speak. And then this recording will then be made available to a community without going through an editorial process. You're not cutting and pasting and slicing. And I think to a certain extent, you can do that as well with the video conversations, as long as there's, again, a mapping of the expectations on the front end. So whatever it is that you do, whether you're interviewing someone over the phone or you're interviewing them in a Skype or Google Hangout and recording it on video, is that you set up those expectations at the beginning and say, all right, well, these are the questions we're going to ask. Are you comfortable with those questions? Should we be shooting for different questions? Does this make sense as far as your participation is concerned? We don't plan on editing in this. You can let them know that ahead of time. And to also let them know that if they're uncomfortable with that, right, that if you have the bandwidth to say, all right, well, we're going to record it, say, in a screen flow, but we're going to cut out all the ands and uhs and ums. That is technically possible, right? Your experience with video editing is what guides how much of a resource that takes in terms of cutting out those parts that you don't want. Regardless, I'd say that what makes content these days successful often has to do with the degree to which it is distributed in bite-sized chunks, right? And so that is the one caveat that I would put into things like the thing that we're looking at today, or coming up on, 40 minutes of content. And is that a good size chunk for someone? Maybe you have the opportunity to be listening to this in the background, or maybe the content that you're producing ends up being a podcast and people can listen to it as they're commuting or on their way to class on the train or in the car. Those are all things to take into consideration when lowering the barrier and reducing the friction to get a subject matter expert to participate. Traditionally, I'd have to say that the thing that we've encountered that has worked the best was the email solution, right? Because it was the sort of low-hanging fruit to be able to say to someone, all you have to do is send an email, right? And that starts the process. And maybe the process is a multi-step process before it ends up as live content on the web. But lowering that barrier of entry so that the subject matter expert has the opportunity to be engaged and be involved without it feeling like something beyond what their capacity can withstand, I think is the most important thing. Well, it looks like that's exactly the amount of questions that we have. If no one has any further questions, I will just take the time to say thank you for your attention and to open myself up to whatever questions you might have offline, and then to turn it over to the good folks at WordPress Campus and the next session. So I hope you all have a good afternoon. Thank you very much.